requested by Boaz, he gave me the title of Traditionalism and Esotericism. And some of you already know what traditionalism is, but some of you do not. So therefore I'm going to start off with the question of what on earth is traditionalism, and then I'm going to move to the esotericism bit by trying to answer the question of how may traditionalism be understood. And for my first question, what is traditionalism, I'm going to cover briefly doctrine, origins, and expressions. And given where I am, I'm going to pay a special attention to Israeli expressions in Israel. So if we start off with traditionalist doctrine, I think there are three major elements in it: perennialism, initiation, and Kali Yuga. And perennialism is partly about the perennial philosophy, and also deriving logically, in a sense, from the idea of the perennial philosophy is the crucial and central distinction between the esoteric and the exoteric. And I say deriving logically because how do we conceive of the perennial philosophy? Well, I mean, it's not there everywhere for us to see. It is esoteric, it's inside things. And how do we then fit the visible religions of the world in with this? Well, they're the exoteric. So we've got our perennial esoteric core common to all the world's real religions, and then we have the various exoteric forms which we find around that. So, in the case of Judaism, which is what we've been talking about mostly today, it would be the Kabbalah as the esoteric core, and Rabbinic Judaism as the exoteric form. So that's pretty central. The idea of initiation, of course, into the esoteric is also central to the traditionalist doctrine. And then the third element is the idea of the Kali Yuga, which, of course, is borrowed from Hinduism. It's the final age in the Hindu cyclical conception of time. And one of the central ideas is that we are now in the Kali Yuga, that we are in the last and final age, and that although some people are foolish enough to think that what happens in the world is progress, the underlying essential and inevitable dynamic is not progress, but decline. Decline until we get to where we are now. And fitting with that is another idea which is pretty central, which is the idea of inversion. The idea that one of the things that happens in the final age that we are in now is that the truly valuable and the worthless become reversed. So, for example, to take the title of one of the crucial books, The Reign of Quantity, one of the things that is happening now is that whereas what is actually important is quality, quality has been lost and replaced by quantity. Kali Yuga, as I say, is borrowed from Hinduism, and this is another central point. It's what one might call wisdom from the East. The idea that one of the things that has happened in this last and final age is that if we want to find the remains of anything valuable, we will have to leave Europe and look to the East. So there, in 4.5 minutes, is a summary of traditionalist doctrine developed over 30 or 40 years in 20 or 30 books 2 or 3 journals. So, I mean, obviously, it was something of a parody to summarize an enormous body in 5 minutes, but, you know, that gives you the idea. All right, so the origins. The key, there is one key person behind traditionalist doctrine. René Guénon, who is described in the street sign in Blois, in France, where he was born, because you know how the French, they helpfully give you a sort of 2 or 3 word indication. You know, Victor Hugo, literary figure, or something like that. On his street sign, it says, Orientalist philosopher. So let's call him an Orientalist philosopher. Here he is. There aren't that many photographs of him around. Here he is as a young man in Paris, and here he is a few years before his death in Cairo. This is Monsieur René Guénon, and this is Sheikh Abdul Wahid Yahya, because he didn't convert to Islam. He got very annoyed with people saying that he converted to Islam. He said that anybody who truly understood the nature of the perennial philosophy couldn't possibly convert to anything. He said that he had moved into Islam. So he is absolutely central, but of course, you know, there's always more than one origin to something. If you want to put together a few more origins, there are a number of other people who were involved either in his first years or in the second period of his life, who were extremely influential. This guy is the source of the idea of the idea that the decline of the West as against the wisdom to be found in the East means that to save the West we have to take wisdom from the East. This guy links him into the Martinists and thus to the Theosophical Society, because everything goes back to the Theosophical Society at some point. This Swedish painter is the link with Sufism and a special interest in Ibn Arabi. Kumaraswamy, who is sort of Anglo-American, Sri Lankan, is the scholar involved in this, who provided a certain amount of the scholarly fabric to the whole idea. And the city of Cairo and practice in Cairo, religious practice in Cairo, is, I think, the origin of the idea which is central to mature Guénonian traditionalism, which is that you, as an individual, have to be initiated into an esoteric practice which has to take place within the context of an orthodox exoteric practice. So it's no good wandering around California trying to be a Sufi without being Muslim, right? You have to place your esoteric practice in a proper exoteric context, which is an idea that he begins to produce once he's moved to Cairo, and you can't really trace that doctrine in any of these guys who were very important earlier on in his life. And I think, I can't show this, but I think that it was a result of the experience of living in a religious country. So, those are some origins. Now we move on to expressions, and just as there is one man who is crucial in the doctrine, which is Guénon, the one man who is totally central to the expressions is Fridtjof Schuon, a Franco-German Swiss American. That's to say, he was born in Switzerland of a German father and a French mother, moved to France and then finally wound up in the United States. Now, Schuon, just as just as Guénon ended up as a Sufi, Chouan ended up as a Sufi, but Guénon was a sort of individual Sufi, whereas Chouan founded a Western Sufi brotherhood, a Western Sufi tariqa, which was central to the expression of traditionalism. Guénon did the sort of hard theoretical work. Chouan added the human element to it, and also the organizational element to it. But of course, it's not just Chouan. We have here Chouan in his Sufi mode. We have some other expressions of it. We have a Masonic expression, and you see here the 3 rings, which may remind you of a certain story of the 3 rings. And also we have this gentleman here, Julius Evola. Evola, these two are both sort of religio-spiritual expressions of the doctrine, but Evola, who had a number of other sources, gave it political expression. Since I'm in Israel, I must mention one rather weird element of Evola's activities. After a short period as Mussolini's advisor on race, he was playing around with the Germans in 1942, and here is his famous essay on race and culture, in which he is criticizing German racial teaching as being simplistic. Anyhow, Evola isn't the main topic, because I want to focus on the religious one today. But I'll move on. These are the sort of historic pre-1945 expressions of traditionalism. If one looks at it today, I did basically find it everywhere, right? And this is, I love Google Insights, and this is people searching for Evola and Guénon since over the last 5 years. You will note that I just put in here searches for Evola and Guénon compared with searches for Blavatsky and Jung. Blavatsky seems to be particularly popular in 2004 and declined somewhat. But of course, you know, this is relative to all searches. So you can have a constant interest in Blavatsky, but an increasing interest in YouTube or something, which will reduce Blavatsky as a proportion of all searches. But anyhow, so Evola and Guénon are up there with Blavatsky and Jung in terms of interest of the world public in searches. And Evola is actually beating Guénon. And this is a disquisition. Is that the right word? I said I wasn't going to talk much about Evola, but I'm just briefly going to explain this by drawing attention to the importance of this gentleman.
May I ask a small question?
Yes, yes.
That's an obvious question, but
Yeah.
what was happening in the summer of 2006 with Evola and Blavatsky? I mean,
I don't know. I don't know. Something, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Right? I did this whilst I was preparing this presentation, and I hadn't really looked at it for a while, so I don't know. Okay, but anyhow, well, it might actually be the rise to prominence of this guy, right? This guy is a former Soviet dissident who is now, he's not quite as prominent as Huntington, but he's now the Russian equivalent of Samuel Huntington in some ways. He gets on really well with the American neocons. When he visited the US, the State Department arranged for him to meet some selected neocons. And you know, he's big time on as a commentator on television and so forth. Unlike Huntington, he believes he's taken the Kali Yuga idea and he regards the final conflict between the United States and Russia as not only inevitable but positively desirable. Okay, because that will end this age and allow the beginning of a new cycle, right? This is a guy who's not only Ahmadinejad. You think Ahmadinejad's a problem? We've got some other problems. He's really popular, and he's led to loads of translations of Evolar's works and stuff like that. There are some other things that Evolar's getting really into. The music scene. I'm trying to indicate here the variety of the impact of traditionalism at present. We have a group called Sol Invictus, who independently came up as a title for one of their songs with the title that I come up with for a book on traditionalism. They're very inspired by the traditionalism, by Evolar especially. The best one is a group called Therion, which is really big in Japan, actually. Their lyrics are written by a guy who was finishing off his MA in religious studies at a Swedish university.
He finished his PhD, by the way, and he's an SWED member.
Yeah, fine. And you know, the perennial Sophia.
They came to Israel about 2 years ago.
They did?
Great performance.
They are great. I don't like these guys, but I really like these guys.
And they have a very new album called Sitra Achra, which some of you I sent.
Yeah. So I mean, we've got, you know, they're in Russian politics, they're in the music scene, and they're also, this one is my absolute favourite. I mean, it's totally atypical, but there's something called Aristasia, which is a traditionalist, separatist, feminist group, which maintains the story where we're in decline from original femocracy, and they live in a parallel world where there are no men. There are simply blondes and brunettes. Okay. I mean, they're totally atypical, but I can't resist them. Okay, but here is the serious stuff, which is the Mariameya, as it's called, the Tariqa, which Chouan founded, which is ran into some difficulties when Chouan sort of went a bit sideways from Sufism into some other activities as a Native American, and some of his paintings are maybe images of primordial and mystic beauty, but they don't really fit terribly well with the Sharia. But despite that, it's alive and kicking, especially the current world leader of it is Said Nasr, who was important in Iran before the revolution. Is now, as you see, a professor at George Washington University and is a frequent commentator on Islam. But there's also a very significant Christian session under James Cutzinger, who's a professor at, where's he professor at? South Carolina. He, because, you know, we're all perennial and esoteric, right? So we've got a Christian section following Cutzinger, following Chouan, within the, well, following Nasr now, within the framework of the where else? Well, there's loads of other stuff, places you can find it. A Common Word you're familiar with, which came out of Jordan, and the Royal Ahlul Bayt Institute addressed to the Jews and the Christians and stuff. We've got some traditionalist influence in there. We've got, if you go to Britain, My Future Kings, last book has an awful lot of traditionalist influence in it, and he has something called the School of Traditional Arts, where you learn to do traditional arts and you read all the traditionalists on your reading list and stuff. All over the place. Something called Fons Vitae, which does really, really high quality translations of Ibn Arabi and other classics. So it's basically, by now, it's all over the place. So, and also what I call the neo-traditionalist. This is Professor Tim Winter at Cambridge University, otherwise known as Abdul Hakim Murad. Not a traditionalist. These people, the Prince of Wales has not become a Muslim Sufi. Okay? He's just, you can see very strong influences of it in here. The guys who run this are Muslim Sufis. The guys who run this told me that if I said in public that they were Muslim Sufis, they'd sue me, so I'd better not say that. He's obviously a Muslim. These guys are meant to be Muslims, I mean, after all, they're the Jordanian royal house. But anyhow, so we've got a sort of diffuse influence of it, as you might expect 100 years later almost. It's become very general, very diffuse. So, given where I am, I have to run through in slightly more detail the Israeli instances of this. And I start off with the oldest one, Manitou, who was apparently very indebted to Guénon, not to Shur, very indebted to Guénon, and who predictably said, of course there's a perennial religion, primordial religion, it's called Judaism. And who incidentally asked what is this name Guénon? How many people in France are there called Guénon? Is this Guénoun? Was Guénon actually Jewish, perhaps? Asks Manitou, to which we cannot provide the answer. I mean, it was a rhetorical question, but it's perhaps not totally impossible. So he's quite indebted. He's perhaps the earliest guy within Judaism in Israel, because he winds up as a religious nation. Yeah. To be indebted to that. I am here indebted to Boaz for pointing out to me that a guy with whom I think you're familiar got really quite interested in this, went to Lausanne to visit Shur, met him a couple of times, corresponded with him for I think 20 years, something like that. Tried to interest Gershom Scholem in this stuff. Scholem, as you find, he does have Guénon's works, some of them annotated. Yeah. So this is, thank you very much to the.
And he published in Hebrew an article about Guénon in the Jubilee volume to Scholem. Sefer Yovesh.
We've also got Mordechai Shriki. We're getting more. We're getting more contemporary here. This year saw the 60th anniversary of the death of René Guénon, which was strangely marked by only one event, which was a debate in Paris between Mordechai Shriki and Alexander Dugin, the Russian guy who I showed you earlier. Now, I hate to embarrass you, but there are also some some expressions of political traditionalism here in Israel. This guy is no longer as prominent as he used to be. Avram Shmulevich, who briefly invented something which he called hyper-Zionism, which has some quite interesting ideas.
Are you sure we all want to know about it?
He seems to have gone quiet recently. He's moved from Caves of the Patriarchs City. What's that about? He's moved from Hebron to the Negev, actually. So he's no longer so active. And there's also this guy, Avigdor Eskin, who is possibly known for a certain curse. A Pulsa Dinora, yeah. So they both of these like going to Moscow and hanging out with Alexander Dugin So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the doctrine, the origins, and the expressions of traditionalism today. I mean, I went through the Israeli expressions in some detail because of where I am, but you know, I could go through those expressions for. I can give it to you for Turkey. I can give it to you for Argentina. I can give it to you. I have a blog which gets a lot of visitors and people, you know, they're from all over the place. West Africa. I mean, you know, this is very much a worldwide phenomenon. How then do we understand it? Well, Favorian esotericism is one possibility, and I think this is the default option. Favre himself understands this as being within his conception of Western esotericism, and if you think back to the origins I showed you, it certainly comes out of the French milieu in question. And it's also a little sort of, you know, putting your thumb in the wind test, where are the books sold, right? And you find traditionalist books on sale in standard esoteric bookshops. I don't know if you know this one in London, something like but if we apply Favre's characteristics derived from, what was the Masonic order?
Well, it's really Christian theosophy, and especially the rectified Scottish Rite of Willenos.
Yes. Well, it actually, the non-intrinsic characteristics are extremely present and extremely important in traditionalism, and this stuff isn't really, you know, it's slightly there, but it's not emphasized. The important thing to remember, though, is that, as Professor Hadengraf has said, esotericism is a construct rather than a reconstruction.
Thank you for pointing it out.
I really like that. I really like that. So let's move on to the self-understanding, right? Now, one important thing is that although traditionalism came out of the esoteric milieu, it very quickly rejected it. And one of Guénon's crucial early books, Theosophy, History of a Pseudo-Religion. Okay? I said that they have this idea of inversion, and Guénon came, although he'd been in the Gnostic church, he'd been in all sorts of stuff, he came to the conclusion that all this stuff was not only rubbish, but actually positively counter-initiating. Okay? I.e., it took you in the wrong direction. It was the sort of thing one would expect to find in the final age. So, they certainly do not understand themselves as being esoteric. They understand themselves as having one origin in a very major Algerian sheikh who has followers all over the place, who was actually the one who transmitted the Sufi tariqa to Shah. And more to the point, they understand themselves as having their origins, as representing truth, as representing the correct understanding of religion, metaphysics, history, religion, etc., etc., which I suppose is a bit, you know, if you go and ask the Pope how he classifies himself, he'd say that, you know, he represents truth, right? And this is much as they represent themselves. It's very rare to find people within traditionalism who are self-reflective, who can look at their own origins. One exception is an American academic called Gene Thursby, who tried to use traditionalism as a theoretical structure in some papers that he gave at the American Academy of Religion. And another guy actually is Alexander Dugin, who sent me an email saying, "Thank you for your book, I read it, I now understand that traditionalism is actually post-mortem." So, sometimes people read what you write. Okay, so how else can one understand it? Well, there are four wider phenomena of which traditionalism is a part, and you know, here they are. Neo-Sufism, Neo-Traditionalism, and also questions of responses to religious pluralism and responses to modernity. And I'm now going to explore those slightly, starting off with Neo-Sufism. Right? There is a very large phenomenon called Neo-Sufism, and it flourishes at the same point that the traditionalist Sufism in the interwar period. And the crucial figure is, of course, Inayat Khan, up here. Gurdjieff never describes himself as a Sufi, but does claim a Sufi origin for his teachings, and goes on about the Sarmoon order and so forth. And through J.G. Bennett, we can trace forward to Idris Shah, and somehow these are the sort of highlights of quite a major. He's post-war, but you know his continuation of this, because I'm still working on him, but I think that he actually combines Gurdjieff with Sufism. So we have a major phenomenon of Neo-Sufism between the wars, into which traditionalist Sufism clearly fits, and it is clearly part of that. We also have the whole question of responses to religious pluralism, and you can fit traditionalism into that as well. Again, I wasn't aware of this, but you know things come from elsewhere. This is a work of a deist, John Tolland, in which he is developing the conception of the relationship between the exoteric and the esoteric, which you find more or less in the writings of Sir William Jones, who founded the Asiatic Society of Bengal, one of the greatest and earliest British Orientalist scholars, the son of a father of Newton, and the son of a friend of Newton. His father was a friend of Newton. You can trace some of Newton's conceptions of the relationship between different religions in Jones's own writing, and then you can trace them into this, a treatise on Sufism or Mohammedan mysticism, which is the first full-length scholarly treatment of Sufism in a European language, and which identifies Sufism as an esoteric expression of the perennial philosophy. So these ideas have been around for a long time, and they're around today. You can find similar ideas, which you can really derive from here, in Huxley, in Eliade, in Houston Smith. Very, very popular in the United States as a basic textbook, this one. There's a slight complication here, because Eliade was, of course, as a young man in Romania, was involved in circles that were reading traditionalists, and Houston Smith is a Mariami, a follower of Shaw. So, we've got multiple routes there. But anyhow, here is another wider phenomenon. We can also fit it in with the general phenomenon of responses to modernity, which include Romanticism, anti-modernism, because traditionalism, decline and stuff, this is anti-modernism, and anti-modernism is, it seems to me, one of the crucial characteristics of modernity, in fact. So anti-modernism is born with modernity. My other quote for the day, this is from Alfred Luce, who suggests that the battle between modernism and anti-modernism is the underlying dynamic of our era. And I think he might be right. And to the extent that he is right, traditionalism can also fit in there. So, here's the last the four wider phenomena. This is a specifically Islamic one, and this is what I call Islamic neo-traditionalism. Here are three of the leading figures in it. What they have in common is that all of them are were not born Muslim and are Muslim. Two of them are academics. All three of them are well learned in the old-fashioned Islamic sciences. And you know, this guy is a Sufi, and when he goes to Saudi Arabia, they have to listen to him with respect because they cannot argue with his learning. It's impressive, right? And you know, they are learned in stuff written until about 1800, and then they lose interest. They are a very interesting, they represent a very interesting trend which is developing within Islam, especially in Islam within the United States, where Muslims tend to be rather better educated than they are in some other countries, where they're minorities, much better educated than European countries, for example. And where there is clearly a demand for an alternative to Salafism and an alternative to the political Islam, the Muslim Brothers and so forth, because you know, a certain type of person visibly does not find either of those intellectually satisfying or spiritually satisfying, which, you know, frankly, if you ask me, surprise, surprise, they're not either of them, right? So where do you go instead? Well, this is what I'm calling neo-traditionalism. And none of these are followers of the Mariamiyya or anything, but they're all influenced by them. I mean, these two speak quite kindly of the traditionalists. This guy is extremely critical of them, and he's saying, rather like Manitou is saying, there is a perennial philosophy and it's called Judaism. This guy says there is a true primordial religion and its current incarnation is called Islam, and that's that. Okay, so four phenomena that it is part of. So what am I arguing that I have to summarize in 2 minutes now to give us time for some discussions? I'm saying that traditionalism is a significant phenomenon in the world today. I'm saying what started off as a small group of people between the wars is now a widespread and somewhat diffuse part of the global fund from which one can take, and people do take, ideas, and that despite this, it does still have some key personnel, Nasser, like Dugin, some others like that. I'm saying that it is a religious philosophy which is important for religion. It's also been important for is important for Freemasonry, for politics, for academia. There are quite a lot of guys teaching Islam at universities in the United States who are connected in one way or another to this, for music, and even for feminism. I'm saying that it is probably esoteric sensu favre, but there are some problems raised there. That it is also its own construction of esotericism, right? Because they have a clear definition of what esoteric means. Esoteric is the central perennial core of all religions, right? That is a construction, right, of esotericism, except they don't say esotericism in order to distinguish from all the rubbish promoted by the theosophists and people like that. They call it esoterism, okay? But anyhow, they have their own construction, which is influential, I think, and makes a certain amount of sense. And also, as I said at the end, as well as understanding them in terms of their origins and doctrines and expressions, we can also try to place them within these four other major phenomena of which they are part. And that took me 41 minutes. And yeah.